a 15-foot shark who played drums, solved mysteries, and never got any respect. Jabberjaw swam into Saturday morning cartoons in 1976, and for 16 episodes, he was the talking shark everyone remembers, but nobody quite understands how it happened. Behind that bubbly voice and those underwater adventures were production shortcuts, legal battles, and one of the strangest cases of character recycling in animation history. These are Jabberjaw, 1976. 10 wild facts you didn't know. Number 10, Jabberjaw was a direct Scooby-Doo ripoff. Let's just say it plainly, Jabberjaw was Hanna-Barbera taking the Scooby-Doo formula and throwing it underwater with a shark instead of a dog. The similarities weren't subtle. Both featured a cowardly animal sidekick who could talk. Both had a group of teenagers solving mysteries. Both had a van that the gang traveled in, though Jabberjaw's gang used a submarine. Both animals were constantly hungry and easily frightened. Even the character dynamics were copied. Shaggy had his cowardly dog Scooby. Biff had his cowardly shark Jabberjaw. The personalities, the relationships, the structure of every episode. It was all lifted directly from Scooby-Doo and just reskinned with an underwater theme. Hanna-Barbera wasn't even trying to hide it. This wasn't accidental. By 1976, Hanna-Barbera had been mining the Scooby-Doo formula for years, creating show after show with slight variations. They'd done it with dogs, they'd done it with apes, they'd done it with teens without animals. The formula worked, and networks kept buying it. Jabberjaw was just the underwater version, created because someone at the studio thought putting the gang underwater with a shark might feel fresh enough to sell. The network bought it. ABC ordered 16 episodes, and Jabberjaw debuted in September 1976 as part of a 2-hour Saturday morning block. Kids didn't seem to mind that it was essentially Scooby-Doo underwater. The show was colorful, the mysteries were engaging enough, and Jabberjaw himself was funny in the same ways Scooby-Doo was funny. For a generation of kids watching Saturday morning cartoons, having multiple shows with the same formula wasn't a problem. It was a feature. Number 9, the show was set in the year 2076. Jabberjaw wasn't just set underwater, it was set 100 years in the future. The year 2076 to be exact. In this future, humanity had apparently developed underwater cities and colonies where people lived and worked beneath the ocean. The gang in Jabberjaw weren't explorers or scientists. They were a rock band called the Neptunes, traveling between underwater venues to perform concerts and somehow constantly stumbling into mysteries. The futuristic setting allowed Hanna-Barbera to include science fiction elements alongside the mystery formula. The gang had advanced technology, submarines that could do impossible things, and they encountered futuristic villains with high-tech weapons. But the show never really explored what life in 2076 would actually be like. It was just 1976 underwater with some laser guns and computer panels thrown in. The underwater cities in Jabberjaw looked suspiciously like surface cities, just with domes over them. People dressed normally, acted normally, and ran normal businesses like nightclubs and hotels. The future setting was superficial, a gimmick that didn't meaningfully affect the stories. You could have moved the entire series to the present-day surface world, and nothing would have changed except the backgrounds. This casual approach to science fiction was typical of Saturday morning cartoons in the 1970s. Shows would slap future or space onto concepts without thinking through the implications. Kids watching didn't care about world-building consistency, they just wanted mysteries and jokes and a talking shark, and Jabberjaw delivered those things regardless of whether the year 2076 made sense. Number 8. Jabberjaw's voice was stolen from Curly Howard. Jabberjaw's distinctive voice, high-pitched, whiny, and constantly complaining, was a direct impression of Curly Howard from The Three Stooges. Voice actor Frank Welker, who voiced Jabberjaw, was essentially doing a Curly impression throughout the entire series. The woo-woo-woo sounds, the speech patterns, the tone, it was all Curly. Frank Welker was already a Hanna-Barbera regular by 1976, having voiced Fred on Scooby-Doo since 1969. He'd go on to become one of the most prolific voice actors in animation history, voicing hundreds of characters, including later becoming the voice of Scooby-Doo himself. But in 1976, when he took on Jabberjaw, he was still establishing his range and reputation. The decision to base Jabberjaw on Curly Howard was partly creative and partly practical. The Three Stooges were still enormously popular with kids through reruns. Curly's voice was distinctive and funny. Using that voice for a cartoon shark gave Jabberjaw instant personality that audiences would recognize and respond to, even if they didn't consciously realize why the voice seemed familiar. Welker brought more to the character than just a Curly impression, though. He gave Jabberjaw a vulnerability and neediness that made the character sympathetic, despite being annoying. Jabberjaw's constant refrain about getting no respect became his defining characteristic, and Welker delivered those complaints with perfect comic timing. The character worked because Welker understood how to make whiny characters funny rather than just irritating. Number 7. The show only lasted one season. Like many Hanna-Barbera productions from the 1970s, Jabberjaw only lasted one season. 16 episodes broadcast between September 1976 and January 1977. 4 months of original episodes, then reruns for years afterward. This was actually pretty standard for Saturday morning cartoons at the time. Networks would order one season, see how it performed, and decide whether to renew. Jabberjaw apparently didn't perform well enough to justify a second season. The ratings were decent, but not spectacular. Kids watched it, but they weren't demanding more the way they had with Scooby-Doo. ABC decided not to renew it, and Hanna-Barbera moved on to other projects. 16 episodes were enough to keep the show in syndication rotation for years. So from a business perspective, the cancellation made sense. The short run meant that many of the mysteries and character relationships introduced in the show never got developed further. Storylines that might have been explored in a second season were abandoned. The show ended without any real conclusion, because nobody knew it was ending when they made the final episode. It just stopped, and then it was over. For kids watching in 1976 to 77, this wasn't particularly notable. Shows came and went on Saturday mornings. You'd watch something for a few months, then it would disappear and be replaced by something else. The constant churn of Saturday morning programming meant that short-lived shows were normal. Jabberjaw was just one of many that arrived, entertained for a few months, then faded away. Number 6. The Neptunes were a parody of contemporary rock bands. The show's premise centered on the Neptunes, a rock band that traveled to underwater venues to perform. The band members, Biff, Shelly, Bubbles, and Clamhead, with Jabberjaw on drums, were designed to look and act like a 1970s rock band. Their costumes, hairstyles, and general vibe reflected the era's music culture, filtered through the lens of children's cartoons. The musical element of the show was mostly window dressing. Episodes would occasionally feature the band performing, but the focus was always on the mystery. The band setup was really just an excuse to have the gang traveling from place to place, encountering different situations and villains. They were rock musicians, in the same way the Scooby Gang were mystery solvers. It was their identity, but not the actual focus of the show. The names of the band members were all ocean-themed puns. Clamhead, Bubbles, Shelly. These weren't names that real people or even real cartoon characters would have. They were joke names that emphasized the underwater setting. Even Biff, the most normal-sounding name in the group, was apparently short for something more ridiculous that the show never explained. The decision to make them a rock band reflected 1970s culture where rock music was huge and bands were celebrities. Kids watched shows about rock bands, listened to rock music, and dreamed about being in bands themselves. Hanna-Barbera was tapping into that cultural moment, even though the show never really did anything meaningful with the rock band concept, beyond using it as a transportation mechanism for the gang. Number 5. Jabberjaw was recycled into multiple other Hanna-Barbera shows. After Jabberjaw ended in 1977, the character didn't disappear. Hanna-Barbera recycled him into various other projects over the years. He appeared in crossover specials where different Hanna-Barbera characters met each other. He showed up in Yogi's Space Race and Galaxy Goof-Ups as a recurring character. He appeared in Scooby's All-Star Laugh Olympics, competing in Olympic-style events alongside dozens of other Hanna-Barbera characters. These appearances kept Jabberjaw alive in the public consciousness, even though his own show was no longer producing new episodes. Kids who'd watched the original series in 1976 to 77 would see Jabberjaw pop up in these other shows through the late 1970s and early 1980s, maintaining their connection to the character. The crossover appearances also helped establish what would eventually become the Hanna-Barbera shared universe. The idea that all these characters existed in the same world and could interact with each other. Jabberjaw racing against Yogi Bear or competing alongside Scooby-Doo created a sense that these weren't just separate cartoons, but parts of a larger whole. Later, in the 1990s and 2000s, Jabberjaw appeared in various Hanna-Barbera compilation projects and retrospectives. Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, an adult-oriented parody show, featured Jabberjaw in several episodes, reimagining him as a washed-up celebrity dealing with legal problems. These later appearances treated Jabberjaw with a knowing wink, acknowledging the absurdity of a talking shark who played drums and solved mysteries. Number 4. The underwater animation was mostly recycled. Creating convincing underwater animation was expensive and time-consuming in the 1970s. Hanna-Barbera, always looking for ways to cut costs, developed a library of reusable underwater animation sequences that they could drop into episodes. Swimming movements, bubbles, underwater effects. These were created once and then reused constantly throughout the series. If you watch multiple episodes of Jabberjaw, you'll notice the same swimming animations appearing over and over, the same bubble patterns, the same background movements, the same transition effects. This was standard practice for Hanna-Barbera. They'd create a library of reusable elements and then mix and match them to create new episodes, saving enormous amounts of time and money. The recycling was sometimes blatant. Characters would swim through identical sequences of rocks or seaweed. Chase scenes used the same background loops repeatedly. Jabberjaw's drum-playing animation was literally the same footage every single time he sat at the drums. Kids watching in 1976 probably didn't notice or care, but adult viewers watching reruns can spot the repetition easily. This cost-cutting approach allowed Hanna-Barbera to produce enormous amounts of content. They were churning out multiple shows simultaneously, all running on limited budgets. Recycling animation was how they made the economics work. It meant the shows didn't look as polished or varied as they might have with bigger budgets, but it kept production costs low enough that the shows remained profitable. Number 3. The show featured celebrity guest appearances. Several episodes of Jabberjaw featured caricatures of contemporary celebrities, usually as victims or suspects in the mysteries. This was common practice in Hanna-Barbera mystery cartoons. Scooby-Doo did it constantly. The celebrity appearances added a sense of cultural relevance and gave parents watching with their kids something to recognize and enjoy. The celebrities featured in Jabberjaw were primarily from the music world, which made sense given that the main characters were supposedly a rock band. These weren't actual guest voice performances. They were just caricatures of famous people animated into episodes. The voice actors did impressions of the celebrities, rather than having the actual celebrities appear. These celebrity caricatures dated the show significantly. Kids watching reruns in the 1980s and 1990s often didn't recognize who these characters were supposed to be, since the celebrities being parodied were from the mid-1970s. This is always the risk with topical humor. It works great when it's current, but becomes confusing later. The practice also occasionally got Hanna-Barbera into legal trouble. Some celebrities objected to being caricatured without permission, especially if the portrayal was unflattering. The studio generally avoided the most controversial figures and stuck to celebrities who were unlikely to sue, but there were still occasional complaints. Number 2. Jabberjaw never got a home video release. Despite being a recognizable Hanna-Barbera property, Jabberjaw never received an official home video release in the VHS era or early DVD era. The 16 episodes existed only in reruns and in the memories of people who'd watched them on television. This wasn't unusual for lesser-known Hanna-Barbera shows. The studio prioritized releasing their most popular properties first. The lack of home video meant that Jabberjaw gradually faded from public consciousness. Kids who'd watched it in the 1970s remembered it, but younger generations had no way to discover it. Unlike Scooby-Doo, which was constantly available through home video and later streaming, Jabberjaw became increasingly obscure. Warner Brothers Ears, which owned Hanna-Barbera's library, eventually released the complete series on DVD in 2017 through their Warner Archive collection. This was a manufacture-on-demand service, meaning the DVDs were burned when ordered rather than mass-produced. It was a limited release aimed at collectors and nostalgic fans, rather than a wide consumer product. The 2017 release made the show available to a new generation, but by then, it was viewed primarily as a curiosity, a weird artifact from Saturday morning television's past, rather than a show that still resonated with modern audiences. People bought it for nostalgia, to revisit something from their childhood, not because Jabberjaw was still culturally relevant. Number 1. The show was briefly revived for Boomerang. In the 2000s, Boomerang, a cable channel dedicated to classic cartoons, began airing Jabberjaw regularly. This introduced the show to a new generation of kids and gave nostalgic adults a chance to revisit it. The Boomerang airings helped maintain Jabberjaw's status as a remembered, if minor, part of Saturday morning cartoon history. Boomerang's programming strategy was built around classic Hanna-Barbera, Warner Brothers, and MGM cartoons from the 1960s through 1980s. Shows like Jabberjaw fit perfectly into their lineup. While they were never going to be as popular as the Flintstones or Scooby-Doo, they filled programming hours and appealed to viewers looking for the Saturday morning cartoon experience of their youth. The revival, if you can call regular airings a revival, didn't lead to any new episodes or reboots. It was just the same 16 episodes from 1976 to 77 playing on loop. But it kept the character alive and gave people who'd grown up with Jabberjaw a way to share it with their own children. There were occasional discussions about rebooting Jabberjaw for modern audiences, similar to what Cartoon Network did with other classic properties. These discussions never progressed beyond the conceptual stage. The Jabberjaw formula, underwater Scooby-Doo with a shark, didn't have obvious appeal to contemporary audiences, and nobody could figure out how to update it in a way that made sense. Looking back at Jabberjaw now, it's easy to see it as a lesser Scooby-Doo clone that didn't deserve to be remembered, and in many ways, that assessment is fair. The show was derivative, cheaply made, and lasted only 16 episodes. It didn't break new ground or create anything particularly memorable beyond its central character, but for the kids who watched it on Saturday mornings in 1976 and 1977, Jabberjaw was just another show they enjoyed. They didn't care that it was a Scooby-Doo ripoff or that the animation was recycled. They liked the talking shark, they liked the mysteries, they liked the gang-solving crimes underwater in the year 2076. It was colorful and funny and filled a half hour on Saturday morning, which was all it needed to do. The show represents a specific era of Saturday morning television, when networks filled hours of programming with animated shows that were created quickly, cheaply, and with formulas that were proven to work. Originality wasn't the goal. Consistency and predictability were. Parents could trust that Saturday morning cartoons would be safe, networks could trust that kids would watch, and studios could trust that the formulas would keep working. This factory approach to children's programming seems strange now, when animated shows are often highly serialized with complex narratives and character development. But in the 1970s, Saturday morning cartoons were meant to be disposable entertainment. Kids would watch whatever was on, and next year there'd be different shows with different characters following the same basic formulas. The cycle just kept repeating. Jabberjaw also represents Hanna-Barbera at the height of their Saturday morning dominance. They were producing show after show, all following similar formulas, all looking similar, all aimed at the same audience. It was an assembly line approach to animation, and Jabberjaw was one of many products rolling off that line. The studio's strategy worked financially. By using limited animation techniques, recycling elements across shows, and following proven formulas, they could produce content cheaply enough that even modest ratings justified the investment. A show like Jabberjaw didn't need to be a massive hit. It just needed to do well enough to fill time slots and sell advertising. By that metric, it succeeded. Frank Welker's performance as Jabberjaw deserves recognition. He took what could have been an annoying character and made him endearing. Jabberjaw's constant complaints about not getting respect, delivered in that whiny Curly Howard voice, should have been grating. But Welker found the humanity in the character, the genuine hurt feelings beneath the complaints, and made audiences sympathize with a 15-foot talking shark who just wanted to be appreciated. The mysteries in Jabberjaw episodes were standard Scooby-Doo fare. Villains in masks trying to scare people away from valuable property or resources revealed through clues and chases. The underwater setting added some visual variety, but didn't fundamentally change the formula. Kids could predict how each episode would end. The gang would unmask the villain, Jabberjaw would do something accidentally heroic, and everyone would laugh as Jabberjaw complained about not getting credit. The predictability wasn't a flaw in the eyes of young viewers. Children often enjoy repetition and familiar patterns. Knowing that Jabberjaw would eventually catch the bad guy while complaining about respect didn't ruin the fun. It was part of what made the show comforting and reliable. Saturday morning cartoons offered consistency in a world that could feel unpredictable to kids. The show's brief life and limited cultural impact might actually be why it's remembered fondly by those who watched it. Jabberjaw never wore out its welcome, never had bad seasons, or jumped the shark in ways that ruined the original concept. Those 16 episodes exist as a perfect time capsule of mid-1970s Saturday morning television, unchanged and untainted by later attempts to revive or reimagine the property. For those of us who remember waking up on Saturday mornings, pouring a bowl of cereal, and watching Jabberjaw solve mysteries underwater, these facts add context to memories that might have faded. The show wasn't trying to be great. It was trying to fill time slots and entertain children for 22 minutes. By that measure, it succeeded perfectly. If you enjoyed these wild facts about Jabberjaw and want more deep dives into Saturday morning cartoons you might have forgotten, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more nostalgic stories.